Welcome once again to the Daily Huddle. I'm your host, Dr. Monica Ogando. I'm in a different place today, so you'll have to excuse me getting myself situated. Okay, so listen. Today we're talking about spiritual bypass. Some of you have heard of the term. Sometimes these concepts get thrown around and we kind of just slap a label on something without really knowing what it is or what it is referring to. So today we're going to talk about what that is, why we do it, and what are some other ways to really do the work that spiritual bypass pretends to do. Okay. So spiritual bypass is when we use spiritual ideas or practices or even pithy sayings to avoid facing unresolved emotional issues or psychological wounds or even just uncomfortable aspects of our lives. It's like using spirituality as a way to escape or bypass the real work of confronting and healing the deeper layers of our psyche. Now, I want to remind you all that the word psyche in Greek, the etymology of the word psyche in Greek is the word soul. Psyche is soul. And so when people talk about psychology, what they really should be talking about is the study of the soul, not so much the mind. The reason why we associate psychology with the mind is because of spiritual bypass, is because we have synonymized the umbrella soul, which is consciousness, which is your thoughts and your feelings, which is your internal world, the place where conscious, unconscious, and subconscious meet. That's the soul. And we've just kind of reduced it to just your mind. That's a function of spiritual bypass. So think of it like putting a spiritual band-aid over a deep wound instead of properly cleaning it and healing it. And it may look better for a moment, but the underlying issue remains unaddressed and may even fester over time. And so instead of engaging with these challenges directly, people lean on meditation and affirmations and positive thinking to mask or suppress what they're going through, what they're feeling. And why do we do that? We do that for 4 big reasons, and they kind of dance with each other. It's a quilt, if you will. They're not individual silos. The first one is avoiding discomfort. I mean, think about it. Facing our traumas and our fears and our deep-seated pain is hard. Sometimes it's just easier to focus on love and light, or other spiritual ideas instead of doing the gritty, uncomfortable work of shadow integration and emotional healing. It's tough to sit with pain, with shame, with guilt, with regret, with sadness, with disappointment, et cetera, et cetera. We never do spiritual bypass. Well, I'll take that back. I'm not going to say that. But it's less frequent that you find people doing spiritual bypass on positive emotions. We don't necessarily do spiritual bypass on joy unless we think the other shoe's about to drop, so let me just measure myself, right? So that's the first thing. We do it to avoid discomfort. The second is perfectionism and ego. Sometimes people want to see themselves as enlightened, above everyday struggles. And they use spiritual language to maintain that image. And the ego can disguise itself in spiritual terms, making it seem like you're growing when you're actually just avoiding growth. Part of growth is messy, is chaotic, is uncertain, is unpredictable. And that level of uncertainty and unpredictability feels messy to some folks, and they would rather not. So that's the second reason, is perfectionism and ego. The third reason is you want a quick fix. Spiritual bypass can offer the illusion of quick relief. When we're hurting, we often want immediate solutions, and spiritual practices might give the impression that they can instantly elevate us, instantly heal, even though true healing takes time and inner work. And a lot of times, healing is iterative. How many times have you ever said to yourself, I thought I was over this. Why is this here again? I thought I handled this. I thought I got over it. I thought I got the lesson. I thought I graduated from this, circumstance, etc. And here it is again, as though going through it again somehow means you failed the class the last time and now you have to repeat it. But this might be a different version of it. This might be a different nuance about it. And you're different, right? And so when we seek a quick fix, we think going over something again is a significator of our failure, like repeating the grade or something, right? And then finally, the fourth reason why we do it, and again, these kind of stack on each other. They all go together, kind of like a quilt that these threads are tied together. Is cultural conditioning. In some spiritual and self-help communities, there's pressure to remain positive and optimistic at all times, which leads people to suppress or deny negative emotions. And it's often like we're conditioned to believe that feeling sadness or anger or fear or guilt or regret or rage is unspiritual, is unevolved. So we try to sidestep those feelings instead of processing them. And I'm much more interested in you processing your feelings, processing your consciousness, than to sidestep it or even step over it. Right? So what's the alternative? Instead of doing spiritual bypassing, what should we do? What could we do? What is available instead of that? And the real spiritual work is about integration. If you look at the word atonement, Atonement, if you look at the word, you can separate it at one meant. Atonement is about integration. It's about embracing both the light and the shadow aspects of ourselves, both of them. Not graduating from the shadow, but owning it, alchemizing it, integrating it. Okay. It's about facing our pain and our patterns and our fears honestly and letting that experience guide us to true transformation. It's not always pretty, certainly not easy, but it's where authentic growth and healing happens. So the next time that you catch yourself reaching for a spiritual tool to feel better, it's worth pausing. Remember, pause before respond, pause before receive. It's worth pausing and asking yourself, am I avoiding something here? What am I not willing to look at? Because that's an opportunity to dig deeper and allow the discomfort to teach you rather than bypass you. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I'm looking at all of you, the ones that have video. Right? So the conversation then is, what is the recurring theme in your life that you find yourself bypassing? Because if it's recurring and you continue to bypass it, it'll just get bigger and bigger and the stakes get higher and higher. And the invitation is, what am I here to release? What am I here to forgive? What am I here to own? So that I can become a more integrated version, a higher elevated version of myself. You don't get to the heights without going to the depths. Okay? There's no shortcut around it. You do not get to the heights without going through the depths. So let's talk about it. Cece, you got something?
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for this enlightenment, because I confess I'm guilty of sweeping things underneath the rug, avoidance. That's why I'm in this problem right now, because I did not know how to face it, or I was afraid to face it. And it originated years ago as a young person that I never dealt with. And now it is manifested in a full-blown terrible situation. And today I'm taking my power back, not just verbally, but spiritually and emotionally because I don't like what I've done to myself subconsciously.
Yeah.
The growth is I'm no longer going to walk around as a child with fear. I'm no longer going to accept it that, backward thinking somewhere in my subconscious, um, being ashamed or not having enough.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm not going to continue to sweep it underneath me like it's nothing, like it's okay to be to live in substandard conditions and to be over taught and out taught. So so that I will be heard now because I'm changing my thinking. God is changing my thinking by the grace of God. So there's no more guilt, no more shame, no more past things that was hidden underneath all that. So today I'm looking at myself and what I can do to stop thinking that way. So this reoccurring thing does not have to show up again, that I passed the test this time and no longer operate with avoidance. I'm facing the opportunity to be a overcomer and to grow and to move forward. Thank
Ashe.
you.
Ashe. I love it. Thank you. That's awesome. What a great declaration and intention about where you're headed and what you're doing. So I love that for you. And thank you for sharing it and contributing here. Because a lot of times what happens is that we, especially with the holidays coming, some of you are going to be around family and friends, and some of those old wounding or old triggers are going to be right in your face. And so October is a great time to declare what I'm not going to do. And mama, you're not going to talk to me. And daddy, da 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 da. And sister and brother and, in-laws or uncles or whatever. And yeah, you real brave in the daily huddle, honey. But around the dinner table, you become that 5-year-old again, right? And so my intention in us having this community together is to equip you and fortify you with your own strength. I'm really just pointing at yourself. I'm not giving you anything, right? I'm just kind of like putting a mirror in front of you so that you can see, oh, this is what I've been dealing with, darling. This is what I've been going through. This is what I'm made of. This is what I'm capable of, right? And that's part of the blessing of saying no to spiritual bypass is that you actually get in touch with some strong parts of yourself that you didn't know you had when you're willing to sit in the pain and discomfort. Now, if you take some of the archetypal work from movies and novels and film and the stories that make up our culture, the hero's journey from Joseph Campbell, as we've talked about here before, you'll notice that the hero has a mentor, somebody, kind of like the angel on this side, and that says you can do it and coaching you through it, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a part of the journey of the hero that only the hero can make. The mentor cannot go with him or her there. Neo can only face Agent Smith at that level without Morpheus. Morpheus has to stay behind. If you know the formula of the hero's journey, then you understand why the best friend dies halfway through the movie, why the mentor gets somehow incapacitated halfway through the movie or whatever, because there's a part of the battle that is the heroes alone. But the part of the battle that is the heroes alone may not have the mentor there, but it has the villain. The villain's there with the hero. And so there's a part of the hero's mastery journey that the mentor cannot teach, cannot lead, cannot show. It is the villain that shows the hero the rest of his grit, the rest of his courage, the rest of his discipline, the rest of his rigor, the rest of his honesty. If you study villains in any Marvel movie, DC Comics, right? Any kind of archetypal movie like that, even the Scar with the Lion King, he's relentless. The thing that we can learn about the villain is that they have devotion to their mission. They will not be sidetracked. There is no doubt. There is no hesitation. They're like, this is what I'm going for. And I don't care who I have to step over. I don't care who dies. I don't care who gets harmed. This is what I'm going for. And it's the opposite. It's the extreme of that devotion that is harmful, not the rigor itself. So that rigor and that discipline and that conviction and that devotion is the thing that the villain can teach the hero that the mentor cannot. It is by that adversarial nature that the hero learns to find his own grit, his own courage, his own strength and might. You can't teach that. You have to excavate it out of yourself. And the way you excavate it out of yourself is by confronting the adversary. The adversary is part of your heavenly team, not a distraction, not an obstacle to it. You do not have a tennis match unless there's somebody on the other side of the net. You do not have a volleyball match unless there's somebody on the other side of the net. You do not have a baseball game unless there's somebody pitching, not just at bat, right? And so in the same way, your spiritual journey requires the challenge, requires the adversarial position, requires the challenges and the obstacles and so forth. Otherwise, there's no game. So instead of looking at it like, oh God, here it is again, trying to divert me from my holy mission, think of it as an invitation to get bigger. Think of it as an invitation to mature in your spiritual walk. So instead of bypassing it, face the discomfort, face the pain, face the guilt, face the pain, face the pieces of you that you feel shameful about, guilty about, insecure about. I don't know if you know this, but there's the term buffalo soldier when referring to specifically soldiers and infantry of color. Came from the idea that buffaloes, when there's a storm coming, the buffaloes go straight to the storm. They know that the fastest way to get through the storm is literally to go through the storm. If you keep running, here comes the storm, and you keep running, trust me, the storm will eventually catch up with you and it will swallow you up. But if you run to the storm and that storm is facing you, by the time that you run through it, it'll pass you by. And it's going to be uncomfortable. Don't get me wrong. It's not going to be a cakewalk, but it'll go by way faster than if you keep avoiding it. And then you'll be on the other side of the storm instead of having to constantly battle with it. And so the term buffalo soldiers refers to the people that get sent first. That get sent first. The first line of defense. The first line of defense is your temerity. And so when it might be intimidating, it might be, you know, there's a healthy respect that fear gives to this adversary. You know, it's like, if you knew. But the reason why that adversary is worthy of respect is because it is just as mighty as you are. Right? Are you scared of breathing? No, because you do it all the time. You're doing it right now. And you didn't even think about it until I mentioned it. And of course, for you, the only things that you're actually scared of are the things that match your gangster. That's the only thing you're scared about. It's like, ooh, this is going to require me to go low and stand high, honey. I don't know if I got it. And those are the things. That's why that adversary is actually a friend, actually on your evolution team. Not a distraction, not an obstacle. It's just doing his job. You ain't got a tennis match unless there's somebody on the other side of the net. So thank you for being on the other side of the net so I can get my conditioning on. Gio, you have your hand is raised. You have something?
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to ask you something.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to hear your thoughts on something.
Tell me.
So, there is an aspect, this is a hypothetical, so it's kind of weird, but it relates. There's an aspect of fit going to the storm, like you can see the storm coming, and at least I can see storms coming, and I want to stay away from the storm. So I'm going to continue to drive away from the storm. And this is not a storm that's going to go anywhere. Kind of like the taxes, not going anywhere. Okay.
Right.
And then in my life, I have sort of built my strength from not being able to run away from the storm anymore. So I'm just going to face it. And then I come on the other side and I build my strength, my character. What I'm hearing you creating a possibility of, no, go to the storm,
Mm-hmm.
go face it, and discover your strength that way as well, right?
Yeah.
How do you navigate between the wisdom of go rock the boat now, and it's time to go rock the boat, and I just like rocking the boat. I like the dopamine from crashing parties and you know impacting people to in the drama of it, the dopamine of the drama. How do you navigate, or what are your thoughts on navigating that?
Own it is how you navigate it. Um, you have to first be honest with yourself about what you're actually doing, right? Sometimes we dress it up, and that's part of the spiritual bypass. Like, oh, I'm just gonna be the bigger person and not deal with this. No, you're being a coward. Let's be honest, right? And so the first step is to just be honest and tell on yourself to yourself what's actually happening. I don't want to deal with the discomfort of this thing. I don't want to face rejection. I don't want to be the bad guy. I hate being the villain in somebody else's story. So I'm just going to play the higher road so that I don't have to face that part of myself. But now you have a different understanding of what the villain is. The villain is part of the team. And so that's the first piece, is tell the truth about it. And then the
I
second,
don't I don't want to be the villain.
I know. So tell yourself, I don't want to be the villain, but I'm not choosing the higher road because I'm that spiritually evolved. I'm actually doing it as a function of my cowardice. Tell the truth about it. Right. And then when you tell the truth about it, then you have a choice. Then you're like, is this the kind of life I want to live? Is this the kind of choices I want to make? Do I want to make choices out of cowardice? Because if the answer is yes, then be okay with that. And the guilt or the regret or the shame about it is irrelevant at that point. Now it's just that's just a way to dress up the cowardice, right? But if you were to just own it, then you can be free because it's a choice that you're making willfully. And And then, of course, as we always say here in the Daily Huddle, audit your assumptions. Why would you be scared of a storm? Because it might swallow me up. So you don't think you have what it takes to handle a storm? That's an assumption. It's
But
probably more accurate to say, I don't want to deal with
yeah,
what it takes to deal with the storm. Right.
yeah,
And then we go back to this thing of like, maybe I'm being spiritually lazy. Maybe I'm being fearful. Maybe I'm being a coward. Maybe I would rather, I don't want to be honest about certain things I've said or done because I don't want the negative consequences of what somebody will do with that truth. I don't want my access to a certain person to be removed. I don't want the good opinion of other people to be compromised if they knew XYZ about me, et cetera, et cetera. So when you start telling the truth about those kinds of things, then you start realizing where you're making decisions from. It's not your goodness. Turns out you are the villain after all. And then you can make a different decision. You don't like my answer?
no, I love it. I love it. I love it.
Gio, you're looking at me like, give me something else.
No, sorry, I got a phone call and it froze. It turns out you are the villain after all. You've always been the villain after all. That's a cool thing to see. That's a cool thing to see in the context of the more I want to avoid the storm, the more I want to avoid rocking the boat, the more I'm walking on eggshells on keeping things the way they are in a particular area, the more I am being the villain. That's a cool way of seeing it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because if you ask in the story, if you ask Scar in the Lion King story, if you ask Agent Smith in the Matrix story whether they're the bad guy, they're going to tell you unequivocally no. They
No.
feel very justified in their position. They understand what's at stake. And how dare you question my motives when I'm the only one in here trying to, fight for what's right. Right? We never, nobody, even the quote unquote bad guys, even the villains, they're never the villains in their own eyes. Right? And so that's why it's important to tell the truth about where we're coming from on certain decisions, because when you can be truthful and disclosing with yourself about where you come from with certain decisions, then you are at choice. If you're just swallowing the press release, then you're just as unaware and unequipped as a child.
Got it. Thank you. I think Michelle has her hand up.
Yes. Thank you, Gio.
Yeah, thank you.
Michelle, you're next. Hi.
So this reminds me of good parenting and bad parenting. So many parents, I don't want to be the villain. I don't want to be the bad guy.
Why
But
not?
children need that guidance.
Yes.
Children need you to stand up to them and tell them what is right and what is wrong, and point out their bad behavior or point out where the pitfalls are. They need you to be that bad guy. You're not just, your role is not just to be that kind mentor and teacher. Your role is also to be, from time to time, that bad guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And once again, it's an invitation to audit our assumptions, because who's to say that holding the line, holding a boundary, being rigorous with a particular standard is quote unquote bad?
Mm-hmm.
Who's to say?
Yeah.
When I was younger, we came to this country. I was 10 years old from the Dominican Republic, and my parents had a very, very strict non-negotiable rule, which is when you come home from school, from play, from whatever, when you come home from outside, here in this house, we speak Spanish. We do not speak English. And I was like, what is the point of going to an English-speaking country and then forbidding us to speak English? Like, that's just backwards to me. Fast forward 10, 20, 30, 40 years later, I am now just as proficient in English as I am in Spanish. Some would argue even more. But I've never forgotten my proficiency in Spanish because of the line that my parents held. Back then, it made absolutely no sense to me. And now it's like, oh, that was so wise. I'm so thankful. And it opened the road for me to learn even more languages. I didn't have that level of visibility into the future like they did. And so a lot of times what we think is villainous behavior, bad behavior, or adversarial behavior, whatever, when you give it more perspective, it actually sets you up for later and bigger wins.
That's funny. It's exactly the same, though a little bit opposite what we had when we came to America. My father said not a word of Czech in the house until we're all proficient with English, because we didn't know a word of English when we got here. And so we have to figure out how to speak English. So we were walking around with dictionaries and, translation books and things, trying to speak to each other for the first few years, trying to figure out English. And as soon as we were proficient, he did the same thing as your father. Okay, now we're speaking English outside the home. Now we're only going to speak Czech so that these two little girls will be proficient and have a connection to where they come from.
Yeah.
And so now I use it or lose it. But when I go back to Czech, it takes me about a week and I'm fluent in Czech again.
Mhm.
I can understand it, but my vocabulary, I need to reconnect with my vocabulary and everything. So it takes a little while for me to, get the wheels turning in Czech. But because my father did the same as your father, once we were fluent in English, we became fluent in Czech.
Yeah. Yeah.
We retained fluency in Czech.
Great. Very good. Yeah. So the conversation around be willing to be the bad guy and
Mhm.
redefine what it means to be a bad guy. And,
Mhm.
in the grand scheme of things, if we understand that in the grand scheme of things, even the quote unquote villain, quote unquote bad guy, serves the same divine purpose as the hero, then
Mhm.
then you would be more likely to accept your role as a villain or the bad guy in somebody else's story as opposed to trying to shy away from.
As opposed to letting children
Run
free
amok.
range and raise themselves.
Run
Yes.
amok, exactly.
Yes. Free range children is what we have a lot.
Yes, right. Thank you, Michelle. That's awesome. And thank you, everybody, for being here with us today. I appreciate you. Remember, of course, our daily huddle tenets: love generously, laugh a lot, shake your tail feather. Remember that moving, twerking is a spiritual practice, raising your Kundalini energy. Eat more plant-based, stress less, sleep at least 6 or 7 hours. If you're feminine dominant, make it more like 9. We need more sleep. We deal with more stuff internally. And of course, always audit your assumptions, check yourself before you wreck yourself. Do not wreck yourself. And when you wreck yourself, rebuild yourself with better assumptions. We love you so much. See you next time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you.
Bless